good afternoon. I believe we're now in the afternoon section. I am going to invite Pastor Wenford Henry to pray for us this morning before we do anything else.
Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, we are so thankful to you for having taken us here safely to this another very important National Disaster Risk Management Council meeting. We are thankful, Lord, for all those who are present, especially the members of this very special council. We present to you now our moderator, Mrs. Marsha Henry Martin, all the presenters on this agenda. In a very special way, we lift up our Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Michael Holden, Chairman of this Council, Michael Holness, Chairman of this Council, the Honorable Desmond Mackenzie, Deputy Chairman, all the agencies, oh Lord, government agencies, the members of the NGOs that are part of this council, the private sector, the members of the Jamaica Defense Force, the members of the police force, the media, and all stakeholders. We present the people of Jamaica. We ask, oh God, that you will be all of us as we conduct ourselves in such a way that will reduce the risk of disaster. But in a very special way, Lord, over the years you have spared this country from major disasters, and especially from the devastating impacts of hurricanes. As we are about to face another season, we petition you in a very special way to be near and dear to this island. Protect us, O Lord, and keep your people safe. But more importantly, help us, O Lord, to recognize your goodness to us. And as we pray today, we pray that our country will continue to move from strength to strength as you be with, O Lord, the cabinet members as they steer this country on the path of growth so that we'll have the necessary resources that if indeed we are impacted negatively, we'll be able to bounce back quickly and even stronger. So place this meeting in your hand now. Guide this agenda. And at the end, O Lord, whatever shall be said, whatever we shall do, may all be done to bring honor and glory to your name, we pray, for Christ's sake. Amen.
Amen, amen. Okay, the honor is mine this morning to also just introduce the head table to you at this time. Well, I would have already acknowledged my own minister, Honorable Desmond Mackenzie. Also at the head table is Mr. Dennis Chung from your programs. You will see that he is Chairman, Board of Management, the ODPEM. A new endeavor for you, sir. Thank you and welcome. Let me just take time to set a little order. At least once annually, the National Disaster Risk Management Council is required to meet to review and advise on national strategy for disaster management. And 2, to review the state of disaster management in Jamaica and report to the cabinet. 3, facilitate effective national coordination of preparedness for, response to, and recovery from any disaster or emergency situation, and collaborate with stakeholders in relation to all that I have read before. Now, consistent with the second schedule of the Disaster Risk Management Act of 2015, the Prime Minister is the chairman, the minister with responsibility for local government and community development, where the ODPEM falls, is the deputy chairman. All cabinet ministers are members, all permanent secretaries are members, and there is a list of several other agencies and departments to include the Jamaica Defense Force and the Thank you, sir. The mayors, the local authorities, which are the local parish disaster committees, a very important role that they play in providing information to this council. Okay? So, in case we didn't remember why we're here today, we all have a part to play, P.S. Griffith, in disaster management, from tourism to health to education. I won't bore you with all of that. You can take a look at the law again if you are interested. So without saying much more, I just want to indicate, sir, could I just? So last year, we met at the Spanish Court Hotel in Kingston, and we generated 3 documents that will be circulated to you sometime after this meeting. We will not take the tabling of these documents today with a view to signing, but there will be another meeting to be held in September at a date and time to be announced, that you will have enough time to review the document that is here and to come back to the table with your comments to allow the relevant persons who are the chairman and the deputy chairman to sign off on them. Is that fair? Thank you very much. That being said, Minister, I'm going to invite you now to come to the microphone to offer your opening remarks.
Thank you, Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Marsha Henry Martin. Want to first of all acknowledge the presence of my fellow cabinet ministers who are present. Want to first of all also acknowledge the mayors, and especially the mayor of St. Anne's Bay, the parish in which we are presently visiting. So thank you for your hospitality so far, His Worship. Madam Cabinet Secretary, other permanent secretaries, members of the Jamaica Defense Force and the Jamaica Constabulary Force, members of the church communities, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, local government practitioners, and those who have been working with us through the years, the Salvation Army, the Seventh-day Adventists, and a number of other institutions, Food for the Poor, the Red Cross. I might get myself into problems. So let me say good afternoon to each and every one of you. I think this is the first time since this August body has been established that a meeting of a National Disaster Council is being held outside of the capital city of Kingston. I took the decision because the country in general needs to have a greater participation, especially around disaster preparedness and the work of the National Council as it relates to our preparedness for disaster. St. Anne is one of those parishes that falls within the category of a high-risk parish. And if you notice on your program, there will be a presentation from the disaster coordinator as to their state of readiness and the areas of concerns as it relates to the parish of St. Anne. The Most Honorable Prime Minister will be here in a short while to deliver the main address. But as the Deputy Chairman and the Minister with responsibility for disaster in the country, my first order of business this afternoon is to officially present to the country at this meeting of the National Disaster Council the new chairman of the Board of Management, Mr. Dennis Strong, who has been duly appointed to serve for the next 3 years as chairman of the board. I want you to welcome him because he comes into the job with a high level of experience. And at this time when it is forecast that this is going to be the most active hurricane season in a long while. And later on you will hear how many storms we should anticipate. But as I did at a town hall meeting in Portland a couple of weeks ago, I asked the question, and I want to ask the question again today. Are Jamaicans really in tune to the dangers we face as a country as it relates to disaster preparedness? I watch with grave concern what is happening in places like Papua New Guinea. Floodings taking place, the various tornadoes in sections of the United States. And continue to ask myself the question, as a country, are we serious? Are we doing the things that are necessary? Yesterday when I spoke in Parliament, I mentioned the tons of plastics that have been deposited in our drains and in our gullies that expose us as a country to grave danger. This administration, therefore, has put the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, one, in a strong financial position, two, to put in the necessary infrastructure for the organization to work and to work effectively and efficiently. And we have put in place a new board of management to help to ensure that the organization is in a position to respond. And we are a praying country. We have more churches than days of the week and months of the years and seconds and minutes. But is that enough? We have to take personal responsibility as a country, as a people. And how can we do that? Yesterday I spoke of the improvements that we have made to the Jamaica Fire Brigade by giving them the requisite tools so that they can do the kind of assessment on our buildings that is necessary. We are building large structures, tall structures. We must take note that we are in the top 5 most vulnerable countries in the world. And therefore, we must ensure that our readiness is at a standard that matches the world level that is set. You can never be prepared because you don't know when. We have seen an increase in earthquakes across the country. Again, that is not something that you can target to say, we're expecting 2 tomorrow or 3 the next day. The only thing that we need to know as a country, that we sit in the middle of that fault line. And that is all we need to know as a country when it comes on to earthquake. So as we prepare to go into the new hurricane season, this administration again has put the country in a position that we can respond financially after a disaster. The National Disaster Fund is over $400 million. We have insurance that has been created to ensure the country can respond. But all the insurance that we have and all the systems that we have put in place, all it takes is one to erode all that we have built. So on the ground, we must ensure that we are playing our part. And one of the new features that the government has introduced is the JICA project, where over some $2 billion have been spent working closely with the Japanese government to put in one of the most modern communication systems that exist anywhere in the Caribbean. It is a first. And we in Jamaica is privileged. As I did yesterday, I want to do it again today. Express on behalf of the government and people of Jamaica our greatest thanks and appreciation for the Japanese for working with us to put this program in place. Next month, the project will be officially handed over to the government of Jamaica. We would have already put in place all the necessary radios in their various locations. The Jamaica Fire Brigade, the police, every arm of government is equipped to communicate before and after. And this is a game changer for the people of Jamaica. We are now putting in place the necessary early warning systems in Port Maria, new sophisticated early warning systems. 15 systems have been put in place in Port Maria that will alert that town to any danger that is on the horizon. Ladies and gentlemen, the fact of the matter is that the government understands and appreciates the fact that it has to play its role. And we are putting in place the necessary infrastructure for us to respond to these disasters. Our shelters will be fully activated. And all that is required is for us to hope and pray that we are spared any major disaster this year. Hope has to be the theme that we carry through this season. The municipal corporations also have a role to play. The Jamaica Public Service Company, and I've asked the Permanent Secretary to request a meeting with the JPS because we want to discuss in advance the cutting of trees that is obstructing the electric lines across the country. Nobody outside of the JPS is authorized to try to cut those trees. That's the responsibility of the Jamaica Public Service Company. We'll be meeting with the JPS to discuss those and other issues. The two telecommunication firms in the country, a meeting we had a couple weeks ago in Kingston, confirmed their commitments to work with the RPEM to provide a messaging system for Jamaicans on their phones. You'll be able to get live notices on your phone. I want to thank Flo and Digicel for their commitment in helping us to prepare ourselves as a country to face any disaster. The municipal corporations would normally use funding for the month of, I think it's July and June or October. June? May and June? June and September for drain cleaning mitigation. And come next month, the municipal corporations will be advised that the allocations from the PRF for the month of June is to be dedicated solely for the purpose of cleaning drains and gullies. This will be phase 1 of the drain cleaning exercise. The other phase will come in September, and then the Ministry of Local Government will provide a third phase of drain cleaning exercise to the municipal corporations to ensure, ladies and gentlemen, that our drains are in good condition to take whatever comes. We have extended the discussions about land slippage, which is of major concern. And we'll be engaging the municipal corporations following the meeting that we had in Kingston to have discussions. And since the mayors are here, we have to face the reality, ladies and gentlemen, that many Jamaicans have built in areas that is not suitable for living. When I went up into the hills of East Rural St. Andrew following the heavy rains last year and following the advent of the major earthquake, I am concerned, not just in East Rural, but right across areas where land slippage seems to be of concern. In some areas we notice where the destruction of the hillside to plant coffee and other things are taking place that leave those areas vulnerable. And I want to urge Jamaicans at every level to take personal responsibility in our preparedness for disaster. The government can do all that is necessary. We are one of the few countries in the world that have disaster legislations that is in place. We had a visit from the Bahamas a couple of weeks ago. They came to Jamaica and adopt our disaster management programs. But all of that, ladies and gentlemen, will not help if we don't have the buy-in of the people. So when the warning comes and persons are asked to evacuate from areas that we know will flood easily. I remember when I was mayor of Kingston, the eye of an hurricane catch me on the Norman Manley road coming from Port Royal. I went there, spent 2 hours with a bus trying to convince people to move. And nobody listened. The country, ladies and gentlemen, the same way we adapt to some good things and some bad things, let us adopt the principle that one of the most dangerous disasters we face as a country is hurricane and earthquake. Until we have an appreciation of those challenges, then we will always become complacent. And I want, as we get into this very active hurricane season, we have seen the disaster of the drought conditions, how it has affected sections of the country. And all that is taking place, we want to ensure that the country is not short on information. Nobody can accuse this administration of being silent when it comes on to disaster. Nobody can. And we'll be having a series of town hall meetings right across the country to expand our reach and to get into the communities. And we know the communities, the systems that we have in place tells us the vulnerable communities. A couple of years ago, we started a program where we used the youth summer employment program to go into communities across Jamaica to identify elderly persons who live by themselves or would need assistance. And we're going to be expanding that this year so that we are able to respond to their needs. So today, as we commence the start of the hurricane season with this launch, I urge Jamaicans to become more responsive to disaster preparedness. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, I would just like, for the sake of the record, to acknowledge that I am in receipt of the official list for the apologies that were tendered. So I would love for the records to reflect Minister Johnson Smith and Minister of Tourism as well have formally indicated their apology. However, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is represented today by Ambassador Sheila Sealy-Monteith. Also official apologies for the Financial Secretary, as well as P.S. Palmer, who I believe is represented here today by her CTD, Dr. Henry, who we ask you to continue to keep him in prayer, the head of PIOJ, has tendered his apologies. Also the chairman for the Disaster Recovery Committee, I believe, Mr. Thompson? Right. P.S. Risden, who has another assignment. She's the chairman for the Humanitarian Committee of this council. P.S. Stuart McFarling. Also P.S. Arlene Williams, who is also represented here today, I think, by her CTD as well. And Mayor Swaby, Minister, we have a formal apology from Mayor Swaby, the mayor and chairman of the KSAMC. For the record, I would also like to acknowledge Vice Admiral and not Rear Admiral. Thank you so much, Antoinette Wims Gorman. Yes, I believe when I said it first, I said Rear Admiral, and I got a little whisper, and I said, let me check it. So wherever that record exists, we need to correct it. Thank you so much. At this time, the newly branded, minted, highly expected Chairman of the ODPEM. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you, PS. I see that we're continuously working together. All right. That's good. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to first recognize, well, the Prime Minister is not here, but certainly my Minister, Minister Mackenzie, who gave an excellent presentation yesterday in Parliament. Other Cabinet Ministers, Cabinet Secretary, Cabinet Cabinet Secretary, Permanent Secretary, sorry, mayors, heads of agencies, Richard, ODPEM, DG, other presenters that are here today, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy to see so many people out. I welcome everyone to this, what I think is a very, very important meeting as we undertake the very important task of readying the country for any possible disaster that could occur. While we are at the start of the hurricane season, and the minister has mentioned it many times, this does not mean that we can forget the other natural disasters, because we could have more than one occurring, right? Any other one could occur at this time, such as an earthquake, or more recently, I think, one of the more critical, and we should classify it as a natural disaster, which is climate change. Definitely it has a significant impact. And so the season, I think, is not just preparing for the start of the hurricane season, which is supposed to be very active, I understand, this year, but that we must remind ourselves that we should always be prepared for any natural disaster that could occur in Jamaica at this time, and therefore welcome this session and the information. I've looked at the agenda to be provided. Although I'm new in the role as chairman of ODPEM, we haven't met yet as a board, been sorted out. I met with the minister though, and the minister has given me my orders, directives in terms of policy. I'm very aware of the critical importance of the council and the ODPEM in ensuring that Jamaica, and especially Jamaicans, are shielded from the impact of natural disasters. This is not to say that when a disaster strikes, that Jamaica and Jamaicans will not be impacted. We will be impacted. And it is natural for persons to only see the impact and criticize based on that. But what they do not see is the role that is played by the persons here in preventing a greater impact than what had happened. And this is what economists call opportunity cost. In other words, you know, we see the impact, we see the current situation as is, but what would have happened if the plans were not in place? In other words, while we speak about disaster management and impact, we must be reminded of and educate the public, as the minister has said, consistently about what the dangers are. And also, I think, Minister, educate the people about what the situation would be if this council was not in place, and if the ODPEM was not in place. As an example, I'm old enough to recall the devastating impact of Hurricane Gilbert in 1988, and the weeks and months it took for Jamaica and Jamaicans to recover from it. In fact, the song by Lovin' Dare, and most of you here would be old enough to remember that, right? It was entertaining, but it looked at the serious issue of how long we had to do without electricity, water, etc. And all of that was encapsulated in the image and the feeling, the direct experience we all had of the cupboards full of bully beef, right? So the council can take credit in knowing that at least you have spared us from eating weeks of bully beef, right? Because right now we have water and electricity back in 2 days, and we're so used to it now that if it don't come back the hour after the hurricane, we start cursing, right? So that, Minister, is something I think that we need to take a step back sometime and look at what has been accomplished, right? And look at where we're coming from. And that's the work that we continue to do, and we should continue, the committees of the council and ODPEM, which, as I said, sometimes we're too caught up in the moment to realize what has been accomplished. And it's something that we need to educate people about. Of course, this doesn't mean that we can't improve even more. And the next step I see certainly is for us to enhance the forecasting, or what you call the preparation for the disaster, Minister, the resilience, I think is important. It's better for us to build the resilience and have minimal impact than just talk about response. And we need to do this because inevitably a disaster will occur, especially I think with the impact of climate change. In Southeast Asia, just last week it was 50 degrees Celsius, right? What is the impact of that? The impact of that is that it affects livelihoods because people who would normally be out working, the productivity levels are going to fall significantly. And in fact, you'd have heard about the severe turbulence, right? I heard that the plane actually, and if you can imagine this, the plane fell 7,600 feet over 10 seconds. That must be the longest 10 seconds in anybody's life, right? And I was fortunate because just 2 days before I flew out to that area, I was in Bangkok for a few days and flew out just 2 days. When I was flying out, the weather was actually coming in. So the prayers that you put up for me work. You put up prayers for me, right, Minister? It worked. So in my mind, disaster management should emphasize 3 major phases. And I know this is what the Minister spoke about. And certainly I think the DG would be in tune with this. That is resilience, planning, and preparedness, stage 1. Management of the disaster, and then the response. And if you put more and more emphasis on the initial ones, then the ones after that become easier. So I look forward to the presentations, which I'm sure will cause us to leave here better prepared as a result. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Just to note also, I believe you have done a good overview for an area that I consider myself to somewhat be a technical expert. But when you spoke, Chairman, I remembered something we learned, not for persons to get too alarmed, but they tell you that the first 5 seconds after the plane, 5 minutes after the plane takes off, and the last or the first 5 minutes before it lands is the most serious. Yes. So it's good that you could put in that man-made hazard component as part of what we need to be considered. That being said, we have a few presentations that the chairman and I'm sure you're also looking forward to. You're not going to see me after I introduce the first 3, so I expect you to come in that order. So we'll have Mr. Alvin Clark, Parish Disaster Coordinator for the St. Anne Municipal Corporations. He will be presenting on hazards and vulnerabilities of St. Anne. And then we'll have Ms. Jacqueline Spence for Mr. Evan Thompson, who is from the Meteorological Services of Jamaica, who will be presenting on the 2024 Atlantic Hurricane Season Projections. And then the third presenter will be Mr. Kevin Tanku, Head Earthquake Unit, for a presentation on seismic vulnerabilities. We'll have them in that order.
Okay, Honorable Desmond Mackenzie. Marshal Henry Martin, CEOs, mayors, councillors, fellow coordinators, members of the cabinet, distinguished guests, a pleasant afternoon to you all. Today, I want to highlight, as the minister said earlier, the vulnerabilities of the parish of St. Anne, letting you know that not only of the vulnerability, but what mitigative actions can do reduce the vulnerability of the parish. Now, people are basically optimistic in their outlook towards natural hazards. This attitude prevails in part because processes that are hazardous to people occurs relatively infrequently. And when hazardous processes do occur, it only affects a few people. Natural hazards are not disasters in themselves. They are simply events in nature. They are not considered disaster unless they cause death, injury, or destruction to property. Hence, the preparation that we put in as a community, as a parish, will go a far way in reducing the vulnerability of the parish. So the potential for these hazards to result in disaster is dependent on preparedness and the ability of a community institution to withstand a particular hazard. On this map, we are highlighting some of the areas that are most prone to disaster in the parish of St. Anne. And I must say that most of these areas are basically flood-prone areas. But outside of flood, we have other vulnerabilities, we have other hazards that affects us. And we want to, but let me highlight that we have there the Discovery Bay area, Priory, St. Anne's Bay, Monique, St. Anne's Bay, which would include the Limehall area, K Valley, Mackney, which would include the Douglas Castle area. And the Douglas Castle area is what I would say a story line that would actually go to show us that where we practice good mitigation activity, we can indeed reduce disaster. And we can leave money out of it. Kind of different kind of flooding occurs in Money than what we would experience in K Valley. In K Valley, which we would have what we call a fast onset flooding. As in Monique, you have a slow. So when you get a lot of rainfall over a long period of time, that's when it's most likely to flood in Monique. It's slow, but as soon as the aquifer is full, then slowly it will inundate the entire community of Monique, and it will take quite some time to go away. On the spin side in K Valley, the rivers overflow their bank, the water rush in, and the town is completely engulfed, and the water will subside in a quick time. Now, these are just a listing of the hazards that actually affects the parish of St. Anne. Floods, definitely. Hurricanes, you know that tourism is real big in St. Anne, so we have to be concerned about our maritime events. Trees have posed a great issue in St. Anne over the past with regards to not just entanglement in power line, but these trees are huge, large, and some of them are of weak structure, and these trees continuously fall over a period of time, especially during the hurricane season. That's when we have the most issues with falling trees. Whenever there is heavy rainfall also and the ground becomes saturated, we have problems with falling trees. We also have technological hazards such as plants and animal disease, and we also have issues with fire. So let me just quickly run through a list of the hazards just to highlight what these hazards are all about, and at the same time give you an idea of how they have affected St. Anne in the past. Because knowing the history of what has taken place in the parish is one of the best ways to get an idea of how vulnerable the parish is to that particular event. Now, earthquakes are unpredictable and can strike without warning, and they range in intensities. And whenever an earthquake occurs, it can cause devastating effect. The shocks also occur in series over a period of time. This is a result of an earthquake in 2005 in St. Anne's, in Coffee Ridge in St. Anne. And what really happened, this was one of the few houses that actually was affected. And if you notice, the earthquake unit will probably be better able to say, but if you notice that this is a slabbed house, it's not properly structured, and this just goes to show that when we build and build with a plan, it is much safer where earthquake is concerned. We need to put up earthquake resistant building. Also, this building is kind of old. Then we have hurricanes, and the hurricanes are cyclones that we all are familiar with hurricanes. Hurricanes are basically one of the most frequent occurrence where disaster is concerned for the country of Jamaica and in extension for the parish of St. Anne. Whenever we have hurricanes, as I said before, falling trees, and just to show, as I said, I'll give you a pictorial event as we go through of the events that have occurred in the parish. There you can see the size of the tree that has actually blocked the main road in Bamboo. That main road leading from Prairie into Bamboo was blocked after this large tree fell across following heavy winds. And you realize that a group of men there are actually there assisting, and it shows how important community effort is with regards to response to disaster. Let us note that the community support is very, very important. And this is the area that we are moving fast into in order to deal with our vulnerabilities. Flooding also is a great issue. This is fast onset flood, even though it is the Manig area, but this is a different situation. This is the roadside area of Manig, and we have fast onset flooding there. But when we go into the town of Manig, then we have flooding like this. Because here we are looking at K Valley, and everybody who drive through K Valley would actually pass that gas station in the center of the town, and that gas station was completely inundated during the event, and so we can see the amount, the volume of water that comes into the parish. Again, at a flooding event, we are looking at Peja River and Douglas Castle. With regards to the Douglas Castle story, that body of water, we no longer see this body of water in Douglas Castle when we have heavy rainfalls, because a project which was carried out through the Ministry of Local Government, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, and the St. Anne Municipal Corporation has drastically reduced the vulnerability, and the water runs off pretty easily, pretty quickly, and so basically we have actually reduced the event there. Quickly showing you events. Now, most importantly, however, subcommittees. Now, we have our national committee, which is at the top. We have our parish disaster committees, which actually really regulates the policy at the parish level. But most importantly, subcommittees that actually carries out the operational activities, that actually do most of the operation and plan and practices outside of the disaster meeting, which supports the parish disaster meeting, and in extension support the National Disaster Committee, so that we are better able to respond, prepare and respond to a disaster. And also we have zonal committees also, which we try to set up these committees at the community level. And at the community level, when we set up these committees, it serves the same purpose. Note that normally we say that the police and the fire are first responders, but in essence, the true So the true response actually occurs. The true response actually occurs at the community level. So they are the true first responder. And it's good for us to provide them with the necessary training, the necessary assistance, so that they themselves can give us the necessary support when we go into our active mode. Basically, the parish has already gone and done the necessary inspection of shelters so that if and when there's need for evacuation in the hurricane, in an emergency situation, we can easily have persons put into these shelters. The team that has been put together through the varying subcommittees are out there and ready to respond, and a network of community persons are also there to support us when we actually go into the response action. So basically what we are looking at here, where disaster preparedness is concerned, especially for St. Ann and for the other parishes in extension, is that we need to have all hands on board. We need that form of camaraderie. We need that form of coordination between the agencies, the communities, and also from the support that we get from the national level. At this point in time, I must commend the municipal corporation for the effort that have been put in of late to help to reduce the actual events that affect our parish. Also to commend the Office of Disaster Preparedness for the support, and the Ministry of Local Government for the continual support that we have gotten over the years. We continue to look forward to working with the community, with the agencies, in allowing that the Parish of St. Ann become a safer place from now on and for future purposes. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And since my former PS is here, let me get the name right, Jacqueline Spence Hemmings, just in case you're thinking that I'm trying to hide under a different hat. Yeah, so I'll be giving you a presentation on the hurricane season. You have pretty much heard what it will be like already, Minister. So quickly, Honorable Minister Desmond Mackenzie, Mrs. Marsha Henry Martin, Cabinet Ministers, Madam Cabinet Secretary, Permanent Secretaries, MPs, Head of Agencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Right, so I thought I'd start with just a highlight of some of the findings for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Assessment Cycle. To highlight, we have probably heard 1.1 degrees Celsius. That's currently where we are. And we have about 20 years. That's a period within which the global average may reach or exceed 1.5 degrees. And the story kind of gets worse as we go along, so we won't go any further. Just, putting a little context into it. Quickly, 2023, we all remember, has now gone down as the hottest year on record. And I will put that in the context of the 1.5 to stay alive. Some of us may know that little tagline. It's actually more than a tagline. Beyond 1.5, we're not sure how what the world will look like. So 2023, on the left, you'd see what was forecast, which was 12 to 17 named storms, 5 to 9 of which were expected to become hurricanes, and 1 to 4 major hurricanes. And on the right, I was not playing. That crossing out is all the storms that we did get. We got 20 storms. And remember that the forecast was 12 to 17. Stay with me. So some highlights from 2023. Everybody remembers in high school or maybe primary school, they said that the hurricane season is June to November, right? Okay, there was an unnamed subtropical storm formed in January 16 in 2023. January. 2023 was an El Nino year, which would mean El Nino means reduced hurricane activity. Do you recall me saying how many storms were formed last year? Yeah. So the warm sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic counterbalance the effect. So yes, the El Nino was very much there. We saw the drought. We're still feeling the drought, but we had warmer sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic. So you had the Atlantic and the Pacific literally fighting it out, and the Atlantic kind of winning in terms of the hurricanes. We had potential tropical cyclone 22. Remember that one? It didn't even reach depression. Everybody remember the impacts? Right? So we don't want it to get there. We don't even want to hear that a storm is near Jamaica. What have we seen in 2024 so far? Above normal temperatures. Lord, it's hotty. It's on everybody's tongue, and it's something that, as the minister has indicated, we need to pay attention to. Some persons are like, yeah, so a little heat. No, it's a serious matter. We need to pay attention. Below normal rainfall, that just adds to the problem. Drought, the farmers are literally crying out. These are just some maps to show you. In April, this is the rainfall you would have received. And you would see over Portland, there was some rainfall. If you look at 2023, you would have got more rainfall in Portland in 2024. But when you compare to even the 30-year mean map, which is the one on the other side, you see that we would have still received more rainfall in 2024 compared to the 30-year mean. And yet it was still very dry. The drought map, therefore, is no surprise, where we see some areas were recovering, but we are still very dry. The sea surface temperatures that I mentioned, these show from January to April, were just warm. It just stayed warm, and it has remained warm, 28 degrees Celsius and climbing. In the Pacific, the El Nino is forecast to dissipate, however. It's still not gone yet, so you will see red areas still existing, but you see some blue coming in as well. So, to look ahead, what's the precipitation outlook? So it's not all bad news. We are expecting recovery, and we did see some rains for May, and we're expecting that to continue. We're expecting by November we should be out of the woods. But in what form that will be, that's the question. Temperatures are expected to remain high. We might have relief in some areas, however, higher than normal temperatures, especially as we enter summer, because some persons are saying, listen, summer start from January. I don't know which summer you people are talking about. But yes, the temperatures will get higher before we see any sort of relief. So the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season, 85% chance of above normal. 17 to 25 named storms are forecast. We got 20 last year. Last year was an El Nino year. El Nino is expected to be replaced by his sister, his mother, whatever you want to call her, La Nina. La Nina means enhanced hurricane activity. We are having drought in some areas. Drought, then heavy rainfall. What to get, Minister? Landslide. We have heat. Boy, it's serious. Why is 2024 forecast to be above normal? The warmer temperatures I mentioned just now in the Atlantic Ocean. The La Nina conditions that are expected to develop in the Pacific. Reduced trade winds and less wind shear. Perfect recipe for tropical storm development. So we have a confluence of hazards that we're looking at. My fellow presenter before mentioned them. You have your dry spells and droughts. So, Minister, you put in the resources and say, okay, the farmers need water for irrigation. And then you hear say, oh, the market people, them, the hot man and them need temperatures. All right, so we have to go put some money there. And then here comes the storms. And they come with their own flooding, all of that. We now have to look at a whole combined cross-sectoral approach. We can't look at the silo effect anymore. We have to think of all the possibilities and try to plan for them. It's hard. The little resource can stretch so far and no further. But we will have to try. You know, no easy thinking for us anymore. As Mr. Chung said, climate change is here, and it's here to stay. And with it, a lovely puzzle that we'll all have to figure out and try to see how best us as small island states can manage. So some impacts and actions. The continued drought will require, of course, water resources and harvesting. Surviving the temperatures, so we need to become more aware, and I still think we're not there yet. We need to pay attention to the warnings. An active season means we probably need to revisit some plans because we have probably become a little complacent, having not been impacted significantly for over a few years now. Incidents of flash flooding, we need to be more vigilant, and we need to plan for possible relocation, although Jamaicans don't like to hear that. And one plus that could come out of it if we have excess rainfall, rainwater harvesting. Get it, try to harvest it when we get it, so that when we don't have it, you know, we can use it. So our thinking also needs to change. So while it's a lot of bad news again, Minister, no, you're not going to invite me again because I always have bad news for you. I'm sure you're going to cross me off your list next time. But there is some good, and we can see, you know, all the good we can get out of the situation. Even when we're having flooding, some of that runoff water, we need to start see how we can capture it. I utilize it somehow. I'm not saying for drinking. Please don't attack me. But I'm sure it can be utilized. So in a nutshell, that is about it for me. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. Before I start, just want to identify some vehicles that are blocking some other vehicles. 4788HB, 0132LB, 1874JK. Kindly probably reposition your vehicle. All right, good afternoon, Council. It's great to be here again. Quite an interesting year with respect to seismic activity, and I'll get right into it as I'm limited for time. So just to recap, you know, a lot of this would have been discussed in the workshop a couple weeks ago. So I'll just sort of point out for those that probably didn't get to see exactly what we were speaking about. This map here shows us just the seismicity for Jamaica, or the earthquakes that occurred in 2023. And 2023 was quite a significant year because we had one of the largest, at least instrument recorded earthquake in quite some time. But this is not nothing diverting from the norm in terms of seismicity for the island. We know the areas. We cannot predict when an earthquake, time and place, but we do know the active areas, all right? And we do know the active faults that would actually create some of these larger earthquakes. So now looking at 2024, for at least year to date, we've had around 91 local earthquakes, predominantly in the eastern Jamaica, Blue Mountain block. That's a tectonic block that we split the country into. And out of these here, we had about 6 felt earthquakes. So 6 earthquakes were reported as felt. Now, why do we get earthquakes? Well, for one, it's based on the location of Jamaica. You would see those 2 red arrows, one to the side of Cuba and one below Jamaica, in the lower left-hand part of the Caribbean there. And it's the interaction of these plates that create different tectonic zones or different faults. And these faults themselves spread across the Northern Caribbean. And it's because of these forces that result, we end up getting these earthquakes. Now, the epicenter is something that a lot of you would hear about where the earthquake was located. And epicenter simply represents the area on the surface above which you actually had an earthquake. So not to be confused where the earthquake actually occurred. You would see in the block diagram there, the focus is where the earthquake actually occurred at a certain depth. And it's this variation in depth that actually is responsible for probably the level of shaking that you get. And in Jamaica, we tend to have primarily more shallow earthquakes. Now, historical data, of course, help us understand why we get, or where we get earthquakes in Jamaica. And we know that eastern Jamaica is more active, primarily because of the regional tectonics. Now, magnitude and intensity, and this is an interesting relationship here. Now, the magnitude 5.6, we look at that little cone diagram down there, and we see it was slightly stronger than, or a little stronger than what we would have as an average tornado. This is the amount of energy actually released. And it's very important to understand this, because when you get a let's say the 5.6 magnitude, 5.6, and you get a magnitude 6, it's actually 4 times stronger, right? And a magnitude 7 would be about 125 times stronger, right? And a magnitude 8 is 3,900 or a little more than that stronger. And this is important to know because it actually shows us that it's not just double. You know, moving from a 5 to 6, it's not just double in terms of shaking, right? It's a logarithmic sort of expression. Foreshocks and aftershocks, we would have recorded over 90 aftershocks following the magnitude 5.6 earthquake. Okay, not me. And this itself shows us that, this gives us that high number in terms of seismicity for the year. With respect to a recent significant event, the magnitude 5.6, I've been asked to speak about mostly the vulnerabilities, or Jamaica's seismic vulnerability. And again, from this event, we would have seen that this is considered a moderate earthquake, by the way, right, based on its magnitude. We would have seen rock falls, landslides, some minor non-structural damage, poorly constructed buildings may have failed, and we've seen also some, I guess, some expressions that we can pick up within the subsurface, or some variations that would have resulted from this. Now, seismic hazards themselves, we tend to split it into primary and secondary. And I'll go through just a couple of them just to show you exactly some of the variations in terms of the type of hazards associated with these type of events here. So we look at first, most known, which is ground shaking. And why I included this one here first is because it's a primary effect, or a primary result of earthquakes. And this one is primarily associated with areas where the soil condition or the site conditions itself may result in amplification of the earthquake or the seismic waves themselves, right? And this is particularly important for areas where we build on soil or on alluvium, right? Because you get slowing down of the seismic waves, and the seismic wave then amplify. So areas such as Kingston, other areas that are built on the alluvium plains, we tend to build on the coastal areas. So it's important that we recognize that ground shaking is something that we have to plan for. We have to at least engineer our infrastructure around different types of ground shaking, or the variation in ground shaking across the island. It's not going to be the same. So you have to cater for that to not risk over-design. Apart from that, liquefaction, here we have the Giddy House in Port Royal. And this is something that we historically have evidence for, as well as in certain sections of downtown Kingston, right? And in certain parts of St. Thomas as well. So it's something that we have to consider. Site conditions is very important to what would actually happen in a strong earthquake, right? Because of the cyclical nature of tectonic activity, we can expect that, maybe not in our lifetimes, but we have to be planning that we will get at least a considerable earthquake that may cause some damage. And so we actually prepare, how we mitigate, and how we respond, that will make the big difference. Now, landslides and rockfalls, just to touch on it, here we have Judgment Cliff in St. Thomas, and I know the following presentation would probably get more into that. But this is also a result of seismic activity. So we have to consider this, especially as we come into hurricane season, where we would have a lot of saturated soils, a lot of saturated oversaturated areas, and a little shaking might actually, result in some rockfalls or some landslides. Surface rupture. Now, we've never really seen, this is probably more in the movies that people tend to relate the surface rupture, that the ground crack open. We never really have this sort of, I would say, impact that is recorded locally, but because of the depth of our earthquakes. But again, because of your rock types and your site conditions, you may get certain areas that you can record this. Now, tsunamis, again, for Sentan, I think you would add to your list tsunami. Historically, there has been evidence of tsunamigenic waves resulting from one of the historical earthquakes. So I would add tsunamis to your listing. Right? But we also have what we refer to as siege, right, or sieges. And this is like, think about a pool, right? If you have a pool and the slushing around of the water. So it's similar to that. Take your bottle or your cup and you shake it like this, and you'll see the water hitting side to side. And this is what was actually recorded in Kingston, right, in the harbor, in Kingston Harbor. So it's something that we have to also consider, that it may cut off roads, it might damage some sort of, subsea cables and infrastructure that we might have in those areas. Fires, of course, is one of the other ones, and I think I might have to probably close it off there. All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm asking you to stand for the arrival of Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness.
Good morning, everyone.
Thank you very much. Welcome, sir. Kevin, were you finished with your presentation? So you needed 2 more minutes. So we would have, come Kevin, and take minister's briefing.
Thank you. Welcome, Most Honorable. All right, continuing, fires. And this is something that I'm particularly concerned with, especially in our built environment, in our town areas. And I know that a lot of investment has went into, the different mitigation programs and building capacity on this frontier. But this is a secondary effect that we have to actually pay some mind to, right? Now, I just want to just mention briefly a new program that we've launched at the unit, the Jamaican Citizen Seismic Network. To date, we've installed 10 sensors. And this is utilized to sort of bridge that gap between citizens and the scientists, improve things like risk perception, etc. We have received considerable support from parish coordinators, and I must commend them and acknowledge the parish disaster coordinators for their support thus far. All right, we are looking for additional sites. Now, in terms of the way forward, of course, additional research. We need to increase our initiatives in terms of preparedness and response, learning from some of the scenarios we would have seen played out in the 5.6. We need to practice actual exercises and not desktop studies. Risk transfer, I know Jamaica has been considerably looking at different mechanisms for insurance and reinsurance. So this is something that I have seen a lot of improvement in. Mitigation projects, improvements to building and fire code, infrastructure assessments and retrofitting programs, increasing the capacity in terms of seismic sensors, moving towards short-term warning systems, additional support to the parish disaster coordinators. They are quite important in terms of what we'll actually do in an earthquake. Additional investment and collaborations. We are collaborating externally with various specialists and scientists. And a more inclusive approach. We can't do this with just the committee representation alone. We need to have some, at least build forward with community resilience projects, be more inclusive with some of in the different areas also, and maybe provide some incentives. All right, so I'll close off there today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all the presenters that went before. I'm just going to invite Deputy Chairman, Minister Mackenzie, to take over the rest of the council's meeting.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Henry Martin. Ladies and gentlemen, without any hesitation, I want you to welcome the chairman of the National Disaster Council to give the main address at this time. Let's welcome the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister.
I was hoping that Minister Mackenzie would have given me an opportunity to catch my breath. But he understands that I have to find my way back to Kingston very shortly. Today is actually a parliamentary day, and he's excused because he has to be at this event. And as I scrutinize the audience, I didn't give any approval for Minister Morgan to be absent from Parliament, but where is Minister Williams? Oh. Because she didn't get any approval either. But this is such an important meeting that I'm sure the Speaker of the House would understand. So let me thank your moderator, Mrs. Marsha Henry Martin, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development, and your Minister of Local Government, the Honorable Desmond Mackenzie, for the management of this meeting so far. I want to acknowledge our Cabinet Secretary, Dr. the Honorable Audrey Sewell, and all the other permanent secretaries who are here, the new chairman, Mr. Dennis Strong, Mr. Richard Thompson, Mr. Alvin Clark, Mr. Kevin Tanku, I believe Kevin just presented, Mr. Canute Ricketts, and Dr. Janice Miller, the heads of the uniformed services who are here. I'm seeing the Chief of Defense Staff and other members of the uniformed services, members of the National Disaster Risk Management Council, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And the Minister of Local Government said it would be infradig for me to go through a formal salutation and not acknowledge the mayors and councillors who are here. Mayors and councillors, it was an oversight on my part. I do acknowledge and respect you very much. And I'm certain that all the mayors, including the mayor of Spanish Town, my hometown, agrees with that. Ladies and gentlemen, disasters are a harsh reality for millions of people across the world, disrupting lives and livelihoods and reversing development progress for entire nations. Just recently, I was seeing on one of the international news services a massive landslide in Papua New Guinea, where over 2,000 persons were killed in one go. We have had disasters that would have taken far more lives than that, but it just goes to show that one day everything could be fine, and then something totally unexpected occurs, and it has national impact, even global impact. Here in Jamaica, we are acutely aware of this reality as a small island developing state. It is something that we live with on a daily basis, but we have somehow managed to live with it to the point where we have just put it in the back of our consciousness. But I'm certain that every day, every Jamaican is whispering a prayer to say, thank you, Lord, for sparing this country from the worst that could have happened. I recall sitting in the cabinet room when the first tremors of that, 5.6
earthquake took place. And when I looked to my right for Minister Mackenzie, he was nowhere to be found. Of course, when I found myself under the table, Minister Mackenzie was out the door. And you would be very proud of us. We followed the protocol. Yes, we ducked, we went under the desk, we put ourselves in the roll position, and then as soon as we felt it was safe, we all ran in single file down the stairs and outside to safety. And we did not go back into the building until we were advised that it was safe. So we were a good example, Minister Mackenzie. We were a good example. And of course, we all did our collective and private prayers of thanking God for sparing Jamaica the worst. The response from our security forces and from our emergency entities, I would not say it was sufficient, but we were able to respond quickly, to give the country some amount of information in the immediate aftermath, and to take some actions to ensure that the nation was properly informed, and to, in the event of any other occurrences, that we would have been prepared. But it did show up some weaknesses in our ability to respond. And I believe that Minister Mackenzie would have assessed the situation to ensure that should this happen again, that we are in a far better position to have a complete and more effective response. And I put it in that way because the truth is you will never be 100% prepared to respond to a disaster. But every disaster that occurs, you must take the opportunity to review it, to see where you had shortfalls and shortcomings, where the gaps existed, and we must then figure out how we can close those gaps, overcome those shortcomings, so that if the next disaster occurs, we are in a much better position to respond. So a part of my presentation to this body here today is to say that we must learn from the disasters that have occurred and prepare for the ones to come. So I'm speaking now to all the managers, all the leaders, all the persons with responsibility who can ensure that we are prepared. I caught the last part of your presentation, and you said the tabletop exercises are good, but they're not sufficient. So we can always do tabletop exercises, planning for earthquakes and other disasters. Well, we had a live test. What came out of that live test? What were the gaps? What were the shortcomings? What were the resources that did not perform? Who did not perform? Why did they not perform? So that assessment, I'm certain, was done. I'm certain that the gap analysis was conducted, and we need to act on it to make sure that we are prepared for the next occurrence of a disaster. It is not if, it is when. So the past decade has revealed a worrying trend, an increase in the frequency and intensity of natural disasters, particularly severe weather events like hurricanes. The escalation is no doubt fueled by climate change. Of course, everything these days is put at the feet of climate change. There is a sense that climate change is a naturally occurring phenomenon. But really, it is a man-made phenomenon. It is our consumption patterns, our consumption decisions, our economic decisions, our development decisions that drive the change in the climate. So, in effect, it is the activity of mankind that is driving these changes. And in a sense, it is also the activity of mankind that can mitigate these changes. So, disaster preparedness is about mankind managing what we do in order to be prepared to develop the ability not just to respond, but to withstand the impact of these changes. It becomes even more complex for us because not only are these disasters being driven by natural phenomenon and man-made phenomenon in terms of weather, but they're also being driven by biological phenomena like pandemics, which adds another layer of complexity to disasters. And then not to mention other forms of disasters which are happening. For example, wars which create migration, or unstable states which create waves of migration which can spur other kinds of disaster responses. So we are living, as we have always done as a society, but now increasing with intensity and complexity, in a time where we could have multiple disasters happening all at once. So you could have a pandemic, a hurricane, you could also have a humanitarian disaster, all three that you have to be able to respond to at the same time. So we have to be prepared. We have to be ready. Thankfully, we have a law that mandates that we must be prepared, that mandates us to be in a position of readiness. And that law mandates that all the stakeholders, all the leaders of our disaster response and readiness, that at a particular time in the calendar, we must all meet, and I must give you a charge. I must drive the fear of God into you. But I must also encourage you to take the readiness of the nation seriously. So, in this context, the National Disaster Risk Management Council plays a critical role in safeguarding our nation. Our mission is to build robust systems to counter the escalating threat of disasters impacting our people, infrastructure, and our economy. As frequency and complexity of disasters evolve, so must we. The Council must be more agile and strategic. Regular meetings are crucial. They allow us to scrutinize our disaster management strategies, celebrate successes, identify weaknesses, and develop innovative solutions for all phases, whether it is preparedness, mitigation, response, or recovery. By working together and adapting, we can ensure the Council remains a powerful force in protecting our people and our communities. We are not standing still, waiting to react to disasters when they happen. We are rising to the challenge and proactively building a strong and resilient nation capable of withstanding any adversity. Now, Jamaica's real challenge over the past 50 years has not been that we have had low growth on average. Yes, we have had low growth. But rather, the real challenge has been the significant economic volatility surrounding that average low growth. So it's one thing if you're growing at 1 or 2% every year on average. But it is another thing if every 5 years you have a disaster which drops your growth well below the average, and then you have to recover. And in fact, the history of Jamaica has been that when we have had a disaster, so we might be growing like this, disaster, and then it takes us a long time to recover, so we grow like this. We eventually recover, only to end up in another disaster. And that has been our challenge. How do we, even if it is that our economy is giving low growth numbers, how do we recover quickly from disaster? Now, I haven't done the research, though I have looked at data anecdotally, but I wouldn't. What I'm about to say shouldn't be taken as scientific. But I have noted that almost biannually we are having a major flood event or rain event that causes flooding island-wide. So if you look at my presentations to Parliament, which is what I used to market, almost every 2 years I have to go to Parliament to explain what the government is going to do in emergency response for roads that have been scoured, or landslides that need retaining wall, or roads that have to be cleared. And I have been doing that since 2016. So almost every 2 years, the NWA has a budget that it did not prepare for. In other words, it had expenses for unplanned mitigation events. So, and it's usually as a result of a tropical storm so far that has created heavy rain. So last year we had heavy rains that impacted St. Thomas, most of the parishes of St. Thomas, parts of Kingston, parts of Clarendon. That's not budgeted for, but we had to find the resources to pay for it. But what has been the difference in the last 10 years with Jamaica's ability to quickly recover from a disaster? If you notice that Jamaica's recovery from the pandemic has been rapid. In other words, so we've been growing like this, 2.5%. Pandemic hits, our economic growth bottoms out. We lost 150,000 jobs. But within a year, we are back up, and we're back on our growth trajectory, 2 to 3%. One of the reasons why we have been able to do that is because of the fiscal program. But the fiscal program, and when we say the good management of the economy, an element of that, significant element of that, is that we have managed to put in place buffers in our economy. And that it's very important that the nation understands this, because sometimes the conversation about good economic management seems to be a kind of mystery. What is this good economic management, and what is the value of good economic management? What is the utility that good economic management brings to the country? So it's not just keeping the dollar stable. It's not just managing inflation. It's not just bringing down the debt to GDP. All of those lovely things that you hear about when we talk about economic management. It's not just ensuring that we have good credit rating. But most importantly, it is about ensuring that when a disaster strikes, we have the wherewithal to respond and to overcome. We never had that capability 10 years ago. Because if a disaster struck, what would have been our response? If a disaster struck, we would have to borrow. Or just leave it. That's a major difference in Jamaica. So in other words, Jamaica in this decade is far superior to Jamaica in the last 3, 4, 5 decades. It's a massive change in who we are as a people, our institutions, as a country. And that's fundamental to Jamaica's long-term progress and sustainability. And I have to use this opportunity to make the point, because there is a sense that is in our people that good economic management has no value for our daily life. We tend to take it for granted that somehow increasing wages for public sector workers just materializes like that. Announcing a $160 million US program to repair pipelines in Trelawney and St. James. It just materializes like that. We just dismiss the value of good economic performance. And when you read the scripts that are prepared for events like these, this is what it sounds like. So by addressing the underlying causes of our economic fluctuations and strengthening our ability to withstand shocks, we have created a more stable and predictable economic environment for sustainable growth. And we just take that for granted. Oh, that just sounds very nice. All of you go back home and say, oh, it just sounds very nice. But don't make the connection of the importance that should that good economic management goes away, should it go away, God forbid, disaster risk financing and risk transfer are at the core of our strategic framework. Now, I heard you say Jamaica is doing very well at risk transfer. What does that mean? And how are we able to do this risk transfer? Well, think of it as an insurance policy for our nation. By setting aside funds and spreading the risk, we can recover more swiftly after a disaster strikes. When have we been able to set aside funds and buy insurance in our economic history, so that we can respond swiftly if a disaster strikes. When COVID struck, we were able to respond. We had buffers. When disaster struck in previous times, we weren't able to respond in any significant way. We had a $40 billion response care package that kept people paid during a time when they were laid off. We were able to give subsidies to Jamaicans to keep their households going. That is the utility of good economic management. So in other words, good economic management is the fundamentally important element of a disaster response and recovery strategy. And if you don't have that as the basis, your ability to respond will be limited. So, this government has taken the necessary steps to enhance our fiscal resilience to natural disasters and shocks, and we are actively building capacity to effectively respond to new and emerging hazards. In this ever-changing risk landscape, disaster risk financing and transfer play a critical role in effective disaster risk management and risk reduction. These instruments help countries and communities recover faster. According to data from Munich Re, the world's largest insurer, extreme storms and other natural disasters caused about US $250 billion in losses last year, with less than half of that covered by insurers. The best way for governments to spread the risks related to natural disasters and ensure rapid recovery is to support the development of risk transfer and risk financing instruments that meet the needs of their country and people. Your government has embarked on a layered approach to disaster risk management and risk transfer. This approach is supported by the National Natural Disaster Risk Financing Policy, which promotes a risk-layered approach to funding disaster relief, recovery, and reconstruction. This includes establishing adequate reserves to address the cost associated with high-frequency, low-severity events such as floods or heavy rains, and transferring the risks related to low-frequency, high-severity events such as major hurricanes and earthquakes through a portfolio of financing instruments. This strategy includes establishing adequate funds, facilities, and reserves to ensure protection against both low and high-intensity events. So this is what the script sounds like. If I were to do a pop quiz around the room and ask, what did I just say? What did I just say? I'm sure, I wouldn't get the correct response from everyone. And this is a challenge, right? We're in an era where there's just so much information, but it's not necessarily context and knowledge. And so we have to take the time to make the connections, break the information down, and reason with people. I'm certain the media may carry some of what I have read here, and it will probably be 2 or a minute, if that, maybe 30 seconds, if that much. And the average man will just hear this and say, oh, it sounds nice, or I don't understand what he's saying. And it floats over. And these really important, these fundamental things don't get into the public discourse as to what is important for Jamaica. Now, my job as Prime Minister is to take some of these complex information, break them down into relatable, bite-sized packets of information that everyone can consume and then internalize it so that it becomes a part of what we call the political economy. Meaning that, you know, the Jamaican voter is consuming information that is not necessarily the best information to help them to make the right decisions about the future of their country. So it's one thing to live in an area that is at risk of a disaster. So you live on a hillside, you live in a gully course, you live close to the sea, and you hear this talk about climate change, you hear this talk about low intensity, high frequency weather event. What is that? How do I make a decision to protect myself against a low intensity, high frequency weather event? What's my role in all of that? What should I hold my government to account in ensuring that as a citizen I am not at risk of a low intensity, high frequency event? How empowered am I as an elector, as a voter, as a citizen to be able to live in this world of multiple and complex disasters happening simultaneously? Part of the responsibility of this group is to ensure that each Jamaican is informed and understand their role as a citizen in this era of climate change, this era of multiple and complex disasters that could happen simultaneously. That is also a part of the preparedness when every man understands. So at the government level, we're doing what is necessary, but we need to do more to bring in the Jamaican person, the average Jamaican, into the understanding of what it means to be a citizen in this era. So the government of Jamaica maintains a national disaster fund which exceeds now $550 million. And I remember distinctly, Minister Mackenzie, you'll recall when we started to look at that national disaster fund, which was $100 million at the time. It was not funded. And we put the money in to fund it. And I believe you have it there at local government. Yes, so what we did, we started to put aside funds as buffers that in the event that a low intensity, high frequency event happens, we don't have to borrow to deal with it. So if there is a tropical storm, for example, which seems to be hitting us on a 2-year cycle, and we didn't put anything in the budget at NWA or any other entity, but it happens, immediately we send out the tractors, mobilize the contractors, the backhoes and everything, and they go out and they do what they have to do to reopen roads and reestablish connections. That's what you call a low intensity, high frequency weather event. So Jamaica has built resilience to be able to respond to these kind of low intensity but high frequency events. That was not necessarily the position that we were in previous decades. And we are not, I'm not hereby saying that we are in a perfect position, but every year we get stronger, both in terms of the resources that we are able to put into our fund to self-insure, because that is what it is in terms of building the buffers, But should a high intensity, low frequency event happens now, which would be like a major hurricane. You know, how many of you were around for Hurricane Gilbert? Everybody here. Most. So that is what you would call, you know, a high intensity, but doesn't happen often. And you can recall that for Hurricane Gilbert, how long it took us to recover. We can't be in that position. We must be able to recover, you know, within the year that the event occurred. In fact, months after the event occurred. That must be our target. And I'm saying this to all of you who are here, that you have to, your agencies that are responsible for recovery, that has to be your plan. Now, in terms of how we finance that plan for recovery, it may have to be that we have to go and do some borrowing. But before you reach to that, let us put aside some money for insurance. And that is what we've been doing. So, additionally, we have an Inter-American Development Bank contingent credit facility providing access to $285 million if we are affected by a hurricane or earthquake of a specific severity. And Jamaica is also a member of the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, the CRIF, a multi-risk pooling mechanism. To guide this process, the focus has broadened to include multiple hazard assessments and comprehensive data collection. The scope of data required for informed decision-making has increased, and analysis of vulnerability and risk must account for the complex nature of disaster. Therefore, ministries, departments, and agencies of the National Disaster Risk Management Council must ensure access to evidence-based research and information across critical sectors. So, in order to get insurance, you have to have data. You have to have the data to secure the insurance, and you have to have data to trigger the insurance. So a part of your job in being prepared for our response is to make sure that we're collecting the data. And I'm sure the entities who are here have been doing an excellent job. That's one thing I can be certain of, that we are collecting data. I see it in whether it is from the NEPA point of view, or from the earthquake unit, or from the fire, from the ODPEM, we have data. But we must continue to refine. From the Met Office, we must continue to collect and refine and analyze that data. So I want to conclude this part of my presentation then by saying that the utility of good economic management is that it gives us a good base on which we are able to respond and recover from disaster. And that is the essence of resilience. So good economic management gives us resilience. It is important that the average citizen understands that they have a role to play in our disaster preparedness. And the critical role is to hold the government to account for what is the government doing to creating buffers to be able to sufficiently respond to low intensity, high frequency events. Is that a part of the political economy of voters? Does that really matter to voters? Maybe not. But in a well-developed democracy, if people are voting on this, then it means that governments definitely have to craft their policies and programs to that. So it's important to have the ecosystem where the average citizen is holding their government to account for matters of how we are responding to climate change. What are the policies? Because remember what we have said, that climate change is yes, it's a natural phenomenon, but in many ways it's a man-made phenomenon. So what are our governments doing to control the man-made impact on climate change and both the adaptation and mitigation to climate change? Is that yet a part of our political economy? Are voters holding our governments to account for this? And the answer is, it is developing, it is seeping into the consciousness. But luckily, the government has taken an advanced position, even if it's not a matter that is of concern to the electorate. Governments understand. And this government in particular has taken a very proactive stance on the climate change issues, our mitigation and our adaptation and our general resilience and response. And you can see that in many ways, our stance on plastics and the ban that we put on single-use plastics. And even though it's a phased approach, but we have taken those steps. Good point now to mention that the public sees the problem from the point of view of unsightly waste and the uncleanliness of our city and so forth. But whilst I see the problem in that light as well, I also see the problem of how it is impacting on the infrastructure, how it is damaging our sea environment, and of course, the heavy use of plastics and the production of plastics and the carbon that releases and the impact that has on climate change. So for us, we take a very holistic view, and we have been putting in place policies as small steps as we can, but relative to our resources, big steps nonetheless, to address these issues in a very positive way. So we're going at the problem from both the cause and the effect. And we are also trying to educate our citizens so that they can be active, enabled participant in this whole treating with this new world that we're living in, where the impact of climate change is something that governments have to mainstream in their daily management of economic and social affairs. Now, in terms of the hurricane season, because we're having this meeting just before the hurricane season, and the projections for this season suggests that it will be an above-average season. Minister Mackenzie, my recollection is that this was also the projection last year. My recollection that last year we would have a above-average season. They're expecting, that is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States, they're projecting that there should be 17 to 25 named storms, 8 to 13 hurricanes, and 4 to 7 major hurricanes of category 3 or higher. Notably, this forecast for named storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes is the highest that NOAA has issued for the May outlook. The start of the hurricane season is therefore an appropriate time to assess the exposure of homes, infrastructure, services, productive activities, and our workplaces, although it is more ideal to have started this way in advance. So I take this opportunity to encourage all Jamaicans as we enter the hurricane season to, first of all, do your household preparations. Put aside food stock and water as much as you can. Make provisions for the protection of your important documents or valuables. If it's only a Ziploc bag that you can afford, or if you can afford one of those hardy plastic or rubber containers, or if you can make provision for safety somewhere. Look at your home and see what is likely to be destroyed in a hurricane. Roof, windows, doors, trees that are in proximity to your home. Start making preparations to cut some of those branches that might become a projectile. In this era where you could have a significant weather event, whether it is a low intensity or a high intensity event, the impact is not only going to be on you, it is going to be community wide. So speak with your neighbor, your family member who may be alone and not in a position to help themselves. Start thinking about the contingencies. And I've gone through a few of these hurricanes, not from the point of view of trying to prepare for my own safety, but as member of parliament or as minister, having to go around and tour. And shelters are an important part of the response. So the entities that are here that are managing and supervising these centers, those should be up and running and ready in the event of a disaster. The conditions in some of those centers are not always ideal. So I think that in the event that your community is affected and you have to go to one of those centers, you should be prepared with your own personal items as well. The Minister of Education is here. Schools are oftentimes emergency shelters. So I hope that the principals are aware and we don't have a situation where we can't find a watchman, place is locked up. And as I have had situations like that being brought to my attention. So we all have to be, because simple things like that, it's part of the preparedness. So I don't need to go into all the details of how we prepare for a hurricane. I'm sure everybody knows, but I've given you the basics. Oh, and I should say your batteries for your flashlights. Very, very important. So as we conclude, Jamaica must live with our reality of being one of the most exposed countries in the world to multiple hazards, including hurricanes, floods, droughts, earthquakes, storms, surges, and landslides. Models have predicted the increased impact of catastrophic natural events arising from heightened surface temperatures and global sea level rise. Adverse events impact livelihoods, destroy infrastructure, and disrupt the provision of services. Through land use planning, urban renewal, and building codes regulation, we are creating safer and more resilient spaces. We are safeguarding our development gains from being washed away in any disaster. Now, as I read this point, and I was driving into Kingston, Minister Mackenzie, driving from Kingston to here, I was observing that there is an increase, a real increase in the number of buildings that are multiple stories. And when I say multiple stories, greater than 3. And that in itself means that we have to have a different strategy for disaster response. It's one thing to respond to, a 3-story fire or a collapse of a building that's 3-story high. But when you start to go to 4 and 7 and 9 stories and 20 stories, there's a whole different capability that is required. So I'm going to take this opportunity, now that I have everybody here. The minister has pointed out that it's something that we have discussed, to be fair. We have discussed this at our cabinet as to what we're going to do to be prepared. And we have ordered 3 trucks that have the extended. 3, Minister? 5. We have 5 trucks that will have the extended capabilities. But of course, there may be other things that we need to execute a rescue or to be able to respond to such a disaster. So, for example, we have to be able to manage traffic to get to an area. So all of those rules will have to be looked at. So it's a whole ecosystem of disaster response support that when we go into this new level of building, that has to be triggered. And so I know the fire department, the Ministry of Local Government, and all the other disaster response entities, and NEPA in terms of the approvals, they have been discussing this, but I'm taking the opportunity to point out that this has to be a special area, a special focus of our disaster response. So as we enter the hurricane season, which we use as our trigger to mobilize our national disaster response, I'm confident that Jamaica has the leadership right here in this room to ensure that should a disaster strike, we have the ability financially to recover. We have the ability to organize to recover. And we have the will and the motivation to even make the personal sacrifice of our time and effort to put the financial resources with the organizational resources, with the leadership resources to ensure that Jamaica recovers stronger and better than we were before the disaster. God bless you and thank you.
Let's put our hands together again for the most honorable Prime Minister for a well-informed and spirited presentation. Now, members, we have 2 more presentations. So we're going to take the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of, we have 2 more presentations. So okay. Now, can we, before we take, open for questions and answers to the Prime Minister, so we could afford him the time to. So are there any questions members of the council wants to pose, or members of the audience who are here who wants to put to the Prime Minister at this time? This is the most opportune time for that to be done. So if there are no questions for the Prime Minister, can we stand as the Prime Minister? Thank you very much, Prime Minister.
So everybody was clear.
Crystal. P.S. You want to take one? Colleagues, do you want us to wrap up and then we eat, or eat and come back? Which one? No. Can we, because the presentations are not going to be long presentations. Okay? So at this time we're going to welcome to make a very important presentation Mr. Canute Ricketts from the Director of Mines and Geology Department. We spoke about the question of land slippage, and the Prime Minister did. So at this time, let us welcome. This will be the first time in the council we'll be having a presentation of this nature. Let's welcome Mr. Ricketts.
Honorable Desmond McKenzie, Minister of Local Government and Community Development, and Deputy Chair of Council, Cabinet Ministers, Permanent Secretaries, Mayors, Heads of Agencies, distinguished guests, pleasant afternoon to you all. My name is Canute Ricketts, and today I'll be presenting on landslide hazard mapping across Jamaica with a focus on earthquake-induced landslides. Now, the Mines and Geology Division is mandated to conduct geohazard and geotechnical assessments. So we collect, we analyze, and we interpret geohazard data, and we produce geohazard maps. Now, it's important to note that the division plays an important role in the development approval process. So we are a referral agency, and we comment on matters of slope stability, particularly along your hillside areas. And so these geohazard maps that we produce, they are used as a tool in development planning and disaster risk management. Now, as it pertains to landslides, the Mines and Geology Division houses a national landslide inventory for Jamaica. What this is essentially is a large database of landslides, hundreds, probably thousands of landslides that have been mapped and have been confirmed by the division over the last decades. And these landslides are used as the primary input data from which we prepare the landslide susceptibility maps. And these, of course, are done at the parish level. So thus far, we've completed 5 parishes. We just wrapped up Hanover. The intention is now to move on to Clarendon. As it pertains to the utilization of this map, it's extremely important that you understand the landslide hazard zones. These are the susceptibility zones, and they range from low to very high landslide susceptibility. These zones are color-coded, so you use the color to visually identify the zone in which you are probably situated. Now, the areas of low to moderate landslide susceptibility, those are the green, the light green to dark green zones. Those are the areas that we encourage civil infrastructural development and residential construction and so forth. And importantly, just to note, because I've been asked before, no, these color codes are not politically influenced. They're just standard color codes. But the areas that are deemed moderately high to very high just happen to be those orange to bright red areas. Now, these are the areas that we generally would not encourage large-scale developments. These are areas that are found to be problematic for civil engineering and construction purposes. Now, the area of very high landslide susceptibility, that particular zone stands out because it is not recommended for any form of residential development. In fact, these areas are recommended to be kept as green areas, or in essence, no-build zones. So a landslide essentially is a downward movement of rocks and soils directly under the influence of gravity. And they're classified based on the type of material that's involved, the type of movement downslope, the amount of water that's present, and the rate of movement. Now, just to bring you through some of the more common types of landslides that we encounter across the Jamaica landscape, just some of the failure modes and mechanism. In Figure 1, what you're looking at is a planar landslide. Now, planar landslides, as the name suggests, it occurs along a linear zone of weakness within the rock mass. So you find that planar landslides are very common in fractured rocky material. An example that we're showing here at Figure 1 is a landslide which occurred at Gordontown Road, St. Andrew in 2020. And you can see where that planar surface along which the rock mass was pretty much dislodged. Figure 2 shows the rotational landslides. The rotational landslides tend to be deep-seated landslides. These are much larger than your planar slope failures. An example of which is shown in Figure 2, and that's at Shooters Hill following Tropical Storm Zeta in 2020. This landslide is pretty large. In fact, it's over 200 meters across. This particular landslide displaced several families. At least 10 houses were destroyed in the process. And importantly, a characteristic of your rotational type landslide is that they take place in small bits of failure. So it doesn't just happen in one single event. So for this particular failure, it happened over a period of probably a month. So we'll do a site inspection today, and we'll see some tension cracks, some areas start to show some displacement. Another week, we have to go back, and that's the issue. It continues. And so coming out of this particular landslide, the Mines and Geology Division is actually monitoring this area through the implementation of boreholes. So we actually went on site and we drilled boreholes in the area to the depth of 40 feet. We installed piezometers, and we're currently monitoring this landslide for reactivation. So rockfalls are actually very, very common across Jamaica's landscape. Figure 3 shows a rockfall in Redgate, Westmoreland. I would say this family was very fortunate because this large boulder that you're looking at was displaced, and it's basically the tree that saved that house from being damaged. Now imagine a situation where a boulder of this size is traveling downslope of a steep hillside, gathers momentum for about 100 meters, and slams into a board house. Imagine a situation where you have kids in that house. Well, that's exactly what happened in Figure 4. Figure 4 is an aerial photograph of a rockfall which occurred in Broadgate, St. Mary. This particular episode, it occurred, I believe, in 2016, killed a 12-year-old, injured 2 girls that were in the house at that point in time. If my memory serves me right, I believe the government of Jamaica had assisted by providing not only relocation, but gifted, or rather granted, a house to the family of the deceased. So commendations to the government and the minister for that worthy and noble gesture. Now, debris flows are also very, very common across the Jamaica's landscape. A debris flow essentially is a hyper-concentrated flow of sediments and water. So we find that debris flows tend to occur in areas that have a high sediment load and where there's a sudden change between your steep slopes and your gently sloping areas. So at the bottom of a foot slope, you'll generally find debris flows where there's a high sediment load. An example, just at the bottom of the Jacks Hill area. So you'll see those 2 photographs. One of them is Figure 5 is a debris flow which occurred along Wilmington Drive, Jacks Hill Road. That's following Gustav in 2008. And Figure 6 shows a debris flow in Hope Pastures following Hurricane Ivan in 2004. I know I didn't include any photographs for soil creep, but it's essentially a very slow downward movement of soil along your slope. Soil creeps tend to happen where you have large quantities of clays, swelling clays. What I mean by swelling clays, these are clays which expand whenever there's rainfall or moisture added to the soil, and it contracts whenever the time gets dry. If there's anybody here who is a cricket fan, try to think about it as day 5 versus day 1 at Sabina Park. Day 1, the wicket is moist, good for batting, good for bowling. Day 5, when it dries out, you develop these large cracks. Nobody wants to bat on that day. Put that situation on a slope, and you'll get an idea of what soil creep really looks like. But generally speaking, you can identify soil creep where you have tilted fences, tilted trees along a slope, tilted poles. So that usually is an indication to show that the soil is actually moving. Now, it is very important for us to be able to distinguish between the triggers and factors influencing a landslide. Now, the factors which influence the landslides are those causative factors, the geology, the soil, the slope steepness, the slope aspect, etc., as opposed to the triggers. Now, rainfall is the most frequent trigger that we have for landslides in Jamaica. And what we're seeing now in terms of growing trend is that there is a growing trend in anthropogenic triggers. That's human interaction. The PM spoke about individuals along the hillside areas, who are cutting down the hillsides to plant coffee, but there are also individuals that are cutting down the hillside for developments. cutting into the slopes, clearing the land, and it's triggering a lot of landslides locally. Now, the last trigger that we're going to speak about, and we're going to go a bit deeper into it, that's earthquake-induced landslides. Now, what we have here is a case study of a Judgment Cliff landslide. My colleague from the University of the West Indies spoke about it briefly. Now, the Judgment Cliff landslide is probably one of the largest landslides ever recorded in Jamaica's history. This landslide was generated, or purportedly triggered, by the June 7, 1962 Port Royal earthquake. This is a 7.5 magnitude earthquake. If you want to get an idea of the size of this landslide, it is approximately 1.7 kilometers in length and a little over 1 kilometer in width. This landslide covered an existing plantation, killing 19 individuals in the process. Now, in 2023, October 30th, we also were impacted by another earthquake. Now, this earthquake was not as strong as the previously mentioned earthquake. It's a 5.6 magnitude earthquake, deemed moderate, led to some light to moderate damage. However, it did generate a large number of landslides. And so the division jumped at the opportunity to map earthquake-induced landslides. And so, for the first time in the division's history, we now have an inventory of earthquake-induced landslides following the October 30, 2023 earthquake. Thank you. So, we mapped a total of 44 earthquake-induced landslides. And these landslides were overlain onto the geology map of Kingston. And what we found was that there was a strong relationship between the location of the landslides and the fault zone, the orientation of the fault zone. Now, if you look at this area, you will see a number of the fault zone, a number of the landslides. I beg your pardon, sorry. So if you look at this area, what you will see is that a number of these landslides are located, or rather distributed, in a very linear north-south direction. And this follows a fault zone which extends from the Dallas Castle northwards. There's another cluster of landslide that you see going across, also following a very linear path. This path is actually the Jacks Hill fault zone, which runs directly into the Plant and Garden fault zone, which you know is an active fault zone, which leads all the way into Haiti. Right? So that shows the strong, very strong relationship between the location of the landslides and your active fault zones. Secondly, what we did recognize is that there's also a very strong relationship between the landslides occurrence and the geology of the area. So over 85% of the landslides that we mapped, they took place in geological formations that were fractured, that comprises volcanic base material. So these are the older formation, as opposed to the younger limestone rock, in which less than 15% of the landslides occurred in. If you want to have an idea, just to visually think about what I'm referring to as the older volcanic rocks, if we've ever driven up Gordontown Road, we can visualize what those rocks look like. If we ever drive through the junction, we can visualize what the older, more fractured material is like, as opposed to the younger limestone units. Those limestone units is what you encounter when you're going up Stony Hill, when you're going up Cooper's Hill, Beverly Hills areas. And based on the results from the landslide inventory, what it shows is that those areas are less susceptible to earthquake-induced slope failures. Now, these are just a few of the photographs taken from our landslide mapping procedure. Dallas Castle Main Road, we had a rock fall in Mavis Bank, Hall's Delight, and of course, a landslide along the Violet Bank to Mavis Bank Main Road. Now, it's important, very important for us to have a look at some of the analysis that we conducted. And based on our findings, what it shows is that 86% of the landslides that we mapped resulted in road blockage. 89% of the landslides blocked some form of drainage pathway. 12% of the landslides resulted in road damage, and another 10% in damages to retaining wall. Now, the Prime Minister recently spoke about strategies to disaster risk response. You know, and this is the type of information that we need to guide preparedness, guide and inform recovery, and most importantly, for emergency response. Because in the event that there is an earthquake which generates a large number of landslides, just imagine a situation in which 86% of these landslides lead to road blockage. We must now ask ourselves, what are the entities that would provide the resources that we require to respond, emergency response? You know, what kind of turnover time period are we looking at? Are we adequately resourced? All those questions have to come to the forefront. And importantly, we have to look at it in terms of scale. Clearing one single road blockage is quite different from clearing multiple large scales, you know, if we have a major earthquake. Now, this brings us to some of the challenges. And first and foremost, probably the greatest challenge is the fact that we can't necessarily forecast when you're going to have an earthquake. And so likewise, we can't forecast when you're going to have these landslides generated from the earthquake. So we have no control over that. However, what we do have some amount of control over is where and how we decide to develop. Right? And that brings us to challenge number 2, which is the issue of construction in areas that are vulnerable and improper hillside developments. Now, what we've noted in recent years is that there is a growing trend in individuals who are now constructing in earthquake-prone areas, individuals constructing in excessively steep slopes. There's a challenge with compliance, you know, poor site modification, the lack of adequate slope stabilization measures, underutilization of our natural hazard maps. And so I would like to just use this platform to strongly discourage developments in landslide-prone areas. For those areas that we can facilitate development, we must aim to implement all the required landslide hazard mitigation measures. We need to screen our slopes, remove those large boulders, terrace the areas that are, you know, prone to failure to improve the stability of the area, implement landslide protection measures where necessary, putting those rock mesh, the retaining walls, the gabions, you know, and importantly, when we're conducting our multifamily developments or large-scale developments, ensure that we do site-specific geological and geotechnical assessments to guide and inform the civil engineering design of those projects. And finally, I'd just like to close by encouraging all members of the public, or engineers, or architects, or building practitioners, or surveyors, to consult the Mines and Geology Division as it pertains to hillside developments. It can save on time, can save in terms of finances, saves with the environment, and it does save lives. Thank you.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a very imposing presentation. And I think it is one of the areas that we have not spent a lot of time on in our disaster preparedness machinery. And I specifically invited this presentation when we had the workshop. And I was so impressed with the presentation that I insisted that he should come on the national platform to make this presentation. Thank you for a very good, very outstanding presentation. In order not to burn you out much longer, we're going to take the final presentation. Mr. Thompson will make his presentation when we convene the next meeting of the council. So at this time, I'm going to invite Dr. Miller to come forward. This again, ladies and gentlemen, is another important part of our disaster response, the question of heat and the effects that it is having on the wider Jamaica. Let's welcome Doc for the final presentation.
Thank you very much, Minister Mackenzie, Mr. Minister Mackenzie, Mr. Honorable Desmond Mackenzie, the members of the Cabinet Secretary, other members of Parliament, members of the local government, heads of the uniform groups, other distinguished members of the audience, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we're hot. It has been hot. The Ministry of Health and Wellness will be presenting on heat health, the response to increased exposure to heat stress. And I use this opportunity to thank the Director of the Emergency Medicine, Disaster Management, and Special Services Branch, Dr. Nicole Dawkins-Wright, who worked very hard and did this presentation. She tenders her apology. She's actually representing the Ministry of Health and Wellness overseas on duty travel as it relates to climate health. So let's get into it. Oh, great. Garble is on the slide. So as it comes to disasters, we need to have a backup plan. This is mine. So the World Health Organization we know that there are some real key points that it's there. We know that there's an increased exposure to heat. We know that there are single events that occur. These events may be prolonged. They may also be consecutive. So when you have the temperatures rise to about 100 degrees, as we had in the last couple of weeks, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we have a problem if we weren't prepared. We do know that it's a public health issue. It does affect the general public, and it can lead to increased morbidity and mortality for citizens and or visitors to the country. Yes, we are a tropical nation. Tourism is important, but we need to safeguard about the health of the persons who are here. And when it gets very hot, we need to know what to do. So our message will be, what are the health implications? What are the challenges that we have to deal with in terms of this heat? And what are the heat health safety practices that we should ensue? The hazard is really heat stress, high temperatures in the environment. We need to get some general first aid guidance. And what are the measures for protection from heat stress? To understand this, we know that we're not talking about a fever. If it's a fever, the body resets its temperature to a much higher level. It's usually due to some cause, whether it is infection, viral, bacterial, or it is some autoimmune condition. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is heat stress when your body then loses its ability to self-regulate. Now, our cells operate in a normal environment at a particular temperature. So if you want the body to work right, then you need to keep it at that temperature. It's a continuum, and there are various illnesses that can be caused. It can go from a simple heat rash, which many people have experienced. You can get cramps. It can move on to fainting. You can get exhaustion or heat stroke. In the body's response to this increased temperature, what we do, we really perspire, natural. Then what happens is blood vessels dilate. It brings more blood to the skin surfaces. And from there, the skin surfaces, you have the heat moving out. Humidity affects this process because if it's humid outside, this evaporation mechanism actually doesn't work so well. We all know this. It's hot and humid, it don't feel so good. All right? Problem with this is that it affects both the health of the person, be directly, from straining the heart, straining the lung. I mean, if you're going to be dilating your vessels, you're going to also pump more blood to the skin. It means that you're going to have to increase your heart rate. So for those persons who may have challenges in increasing their heart rate, either due to cardiovascular disease or medications that they're on, that's going to be a problem. Other things including, like for those persons who have lung conditions, particularly those who are asthmatics and have COPD, typically when it gets very hot, it gets very dry. So you have an increased amount of pollution and you have an increased amount of dust, which are major trigger factors for these conditions, and these people may have a problem. The other thing is it may be associated with fatigue and people get tired. If you're working, especially if you're working outside, and we'll just paint the situation. We have firefighters in the house, so we're good. You're on a ladder. You're a painter. You were commissioned to paint the high-rise. Yes, there was some scaffolding, but it's very hot outside. It's 96 degrees. And you get tired and fatigued. You may have a problem because you may fall off the ladder. So injury and accidents are real potential problems that we have because of this heat. So is it preventable? Yeah, a lot of the complications are preventable. We just need to do some planning. We need to remember that the most serious complication of a heat illness is heat stroke, and it can kill. It can also shut down the major organs, and if you shut down the major organs, the individual has a problem. So what we need to do is recognize that the person is having a heat illness, interrupt it, and reverse whatever progression of the heat illness there is. Again. So, the top of that slide had said that with good public health measures, we would be able to mitigate against the problems with heat illness. However, we have a few challenges, and the challenges include how aware we are, or lack thereof, of the challenges and things that we need to do to prevent and mitigate against heat illness. Is there local research? It's a little insufficient. We do have a large population of workers in the informal sector who, for their daily work, they have to work in extreme temperatures. They're outside. So I'm talking about our construction workers or road workers. We do lack some standards in terms of what the heat health and heat policies are. And by talking about it and putting some things in place, we can mitigate against the effects of heat and ultimately save lives. In terms of key recommendations from us, when we're looking at the individuals, the household, and organizations, we need to know, apart from the recognition of what we're talking about, what are the general guidance for first aid? And for that continuum that we're talking about, from the heat rash going straight up to the heat stroke, what do you do for each of these? We need to look at ways to protect against heat stress. Is there a heat policy for your organization? Do you have an individual policy? Is there a policy for your household? And who is in your household? Do you have young children? Do you have neonates? Do you have elderly persons? Do you have persons who are disabled who may not be able to react, for want of a better word, to increasing temperatures? So if it is that you have neonates and very young children in the house, it gets really hot. Because of the age and development stage of that child, they're not going to be able to move to somewhere cooler. They may be confined to a crib. They're not going to be able to change their clothes and go into loose-fitting clothing. So if those persons are amongst your household, you need to have a plan on what to do and how to make sure that you keep those children safe. Make sure that you keep the elderly safe. And if it's an institution, do that for all the persons in the institution. A few prevention tips. Ministry of Health, we would not leave here without giving you this. We do know dehydration is associated with heat health. Dehydration affects several things. If you're a diabetic, if you're dehydrated, it's going to make your condition worse. We're going to do the message. Avoid the alcohol. It makes heat illnesses worse. Avoid the alcohol. I know that we are at an all-inclusive resort. Avoid the alcohol. Avoid things that act like diuretics, so caffeinated beverages. I'm going to do the sugar thing, the soda. All right. Wear cool clothing. And they're, if you're working outside, they're actually commercially prepared vests that have cooling agents that you can make use of. They may cost a bit of money, but you can still make use of them if you can. You need to keep yourself adequately hydrated. 2 cups of water per hour. Yes, that is in addition to those 8 glasses of water you were supposed to drink every day, unless you were on a fluid restriction regime because of whatever health problem you may have. And since activity may make you worse in a heat situation and heat stress, we recommend that you take a break, a 15-minute break every 2 hours. So let me explain that. So when you're active, I mean, I'm not talking, the fit still happens. The unfit is the persons that I'm going to be more concerned about right now. You are going to increase your heart rate just by the activity. Yeah, everybody knows. You go to the gym, the aim is to do the cardiovascular activity until you increase your heart rate. Now, as I said before, the heat illness and the effects of the heat in the environment is going to cause the body to try and cool itself, which means that it's going to vasodilate your blood vessels and bring the blood to the skin. It's going to increase the heart rate, which means that you're dehydrated and increase a bit more. You have this heat problem, it's going to go and increase. Now, if your body can't take that double increase, we have a problem. See where I'm going? So hence, every 2 hours, 15 minutes of rest. It is said that the heat is here to stay. So this might be the coolest summer that you have experienced. Last summer was said to be the hottest summer. I think this one is actually looking to beat it. So do you have an action plan? Is there a heat health action plan that you have? And this is to be for both urban and non-urban populations. We do know that because of urbanization, there's a thing called the urban heat island effect, where it is actually hotter in urban areas because of all of the high rises, the pavements, and the relative lack of green space within, as opposed to rural areas and villages where you have massive expanses of lovely green space, lands, hillside, and all of those lovely things. The urbanization is a risk factor. And as such, when we build our buildings, we need to take that into account. We need to see if we can get passive cooling measures and see if we can get adequate ventilation going across your buildings. It will make life better for all who goes to this building, right? The other thing that you can actually do is readjust your decor somewhat. Instead of using darker colors on the walls, you can use lighter colors and reflective surfaces, and this should make your buildings cooler, right? So adequate ventilation, think about the choice of paint, and make sure that you use some passive ways of cooling. And this is in addition to the other measures, the air conditioners, the fans, and do all of those other things that we normally do. So what is the response for caregivers and supervisors when we're looking on occupational health and safety and institutional health? What is your role? Your role is to ensure that there are actually things that are in place. You're going to be looking on the key primary factors that will affect the heat illness or prevention of having a heat illness in the persons who are under your purview. You look on the environment. Might not be able to do anything much about it, but you can certainly monitor what is going on. So is it that you know that there's going to be a heat wave? Has the Meteorological Office of Jamaica sent out a bulletin, a warning, an early warning sign to say that, well, hello, it is going to be hotter this week as opposed to last week. The temperatures are going to rise, and they usually give the expected temperature. And citizens should take matters and put mitigation matters in place. So You might need to walk with more water, wear loose clothing. If it is that you had a project that had to be done outside, if it can be done on a different week, outside of the time when you're going to have these extremely high temperatures, rearrange it. Monitor the individual, and the individuals still have to take responsibility for themselves, so you need to monitor yourself as well. Are you having any effects of heat illness? And if it is, do you have the measures, or can you take measures in terms of mitigating against it? All right? So monitor yourself, monitor your employees, monitor the atmosphere. If it is that you see somebody getting into trouble, you need to access some medical care. You need to know where your medical care is. So if it is, it shouldn't be at the time when the person faints or is unconscious that you're thinking, so where's the nearest hospital or doctor? That should be in, we're dealing with occupational health. So that should be in all of your purview and all of your documents and stuff. And your employees and supervisors should be aware of it. It can't just be the supervisor who knows and knows what to do, because in the event, and I'm going to cross everything here, in the event that the supervisor is the person who has the problem, somebody will need to help the supervisor. You get what I'm saying? All right. So our response as the ministry, there is a climate action health program that is actively run through the Emergency Disaster Management and Special Services branch. Heat health is actually incorporated into the health education curriculum at the Ministry of Health. There are advisories from the Ministry of Health based on the Met Office Bulletin, yes. We work very closely with them, and we have a collaborative partnership with the Met Office for other things on disasters, but heat health and the heat health early warning system is a part of it. We do need a contingency plan for our disaster preparedness exercises. So we do have simulation exercises going on throughout the various parishes, throughout the various health centers, hospitals, from time to time. Contingency planning in terms for heat needs to be specifically included in this. And to that end, Jamaica is actually one of the pilot nations in the Caribbean for the development of the heat health early warning project. And this was out of the recently held Caribbean Regional Stakeholders meeting in April of this year. And there is a collaboration with the Met Office. What we really need when in developing this sort of early warning system, you really need to determine, okay, what is the temperature that we're going to use to say we need to send out a notice. You need to send out warnings. You need to look at your communication system as to say, how are you going to get the message to everyone and get the message to everyone quickly? What actions are going to be taken? And like for every system, you need to evaluate the response, what happened, and everything along the way to see if you can make it better. There is a move for training of our Met Office staff through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And there will be GIS mapping for heat hazards, similar to what they did for land slippage and earthquake mapping across the country. Ooh, nice. So, this was my final slide. Let me tell you what it says. In summary, what are we going to do to keep ourselves cool? We are going to ensure that your home is cool. I didn't mention a lot of it before, so we're going to do it now. So we know that the temperature is higher in the day as it is at night. It means that to keep your home cool, apart from your standard ACs, fans, and open and cross ventilation, you need to ensure that you have your windows covered, blinds are down during the day, so that you can block the direct sunlight from entering the house and decrease the temperature in the house. For nighttime, you need to open it all up. Open up the windows, open up the doors, open up the blinds. Yes, we do know that there might be a little mosquito issue that you need to deal with, using the usual things that you deal with them. But you need to open the house and allow the house to be cooled, right? If you are looking on buildings and stuff, you need to look on a cool roof. And now this is going to be a little judgment call, because we do have other hazards that affect the country that different roofing systems are actually better than others. So a slab roof might be nice for a hurricane, might not be so nice for an earthquake, and because it traps a lot of heat, it might not be so nice for a heat illness. So you need to look on your geographic location, look on your hazards, do the mitigation planning, and see how best to do it. It might mean, instead of having your roof at, you can tell I'm not a builder here, 8 feet, you may want to raise it to 15. You may want to put windows on either side. Right, just saying. Now, you know that it is hot. Do not go outside if you can help it at the time of the day where the sun is highest and the heat index and the temperature of outside is the highest. If you can stay indoors, my advice to you is please stay indoors, all right? If you're going to have to go outside, wear loose clothing, cotton, loose-fitting clothing, and clearly for your persons that you're in charge of that are unable to dress themselves, mainly very small children or the elderly who may be incapacitated because of other things, you need to ensure that the same measures that you do for you, you do for them. You're going to need to ensure that you have adequate hydration with you. You need to, yes, drink the water, not the caffeinated beverages, not the coffee, not the tea, not the soda, not the alcohol, because those things actually make life a little worse if you have a heat illness. You need to be able to recognize the symptoms, and if you're having a challenge, move away. You may want to take more frequent cold showers. You may want to damp the clothes or spray mist. If it is that you are unable to move, go under a shaded area and see if that is going to help you. Now, for those persons who are having problems with the heat illness, they're fatigued, they're tired, they may be cramping, they may having mental exhaustion, they may be unconscious, hopefully they don't get to that point, or they may have seizures, you need to get them to medical care, right? You need to call for help, right? You can call for help publicly, privately, pre-hospital health care. You need to call for help. And while you call for help, please do not leave the individual by themselves, right? There are a few people who may arrest and have a cardiopulmonary arrest, and they would, for them to be revived, you need to do immediate cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So we don't really want you to leave them by themselves, and if CPR is indicated, you're going to need to do it. So keep safe, keep cool, keep hydrated, ensure the place is well ventilated. If you do not have a heat health policy for yourself, your organization, think about developing one, right? And if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to call the Ministry of Health. With that, I thank you. Stay cool.
Okay, I know we're all pressed, so in the interest of time, let me thank all the presenters on behalf of the Council for excellent presentations. May we stand for the playing, I believe, of the national anthem, after which we'll break for lunch. thank you very much. Mr. Campbell, could you please come to give some details regarding the lunch? I believe